Сайн байцгаана уу хүн үзэгчдээ. Өнөөдөр орой манай дефакто нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор Америк нэгдсэн улсын нефть хийн Яамны дид сайдын үүрэг гүйцэтгэж байгаа ноён Кристофер Смит оролцож байна.
Кристофер Смит Америк нэгдсэн улсын Эрчим хүчний Яамны Малтмал түлшний эрчим хүчийг хариуцсан туслах төрийн нарийн бичгийн дарга. Малтмал түлшний судалгаа, хөгжлийн хөтөлбөрөөс гадна Америк нэгдсэн улсын шатахууны нөөцийг хариуцдаг. 2009 оноос хойш Обамагийн засаг захиргаанд ажиллаж байна. Засгийн газарт ажиллахаас өмнө хувийн компаниудад ажиллаж байсан. Америк нэгдсэн улсын армийн офицерын хуваар Өмнөд Солонгос, Хавайид үүрэг гүйцэтгэж байсан. Вест Поинт дахь Америк нэгдсэн улсын цэргийн академиг инженерийн удирдлагын бакалавр зэрэгтээ төгссөн. Кэмбрижийн Их Сургуулийг бизнесийн удирдлагын мастер зэрэгтээ төгссөн. Эхнэр хоёр хүүхдийн хамтаар Александрийн хотод амьдардаг.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for coming to our studio. Welcome to Mongolia.
Well, thank you for having me.
What brought you to Mongolia today?
Well, I'm here in the region, and a couple of months ago, I was presented with me the opportunity to come and visit the Mongolian capital here in Ulaanbaatar, and it was something that I really look forward to doing. I came here as a tourist some 13 years ago, back in 2000. I spent about 3 weeks here in Mongolia.
Wow.
A few days in the capital city, and then the rest of the time near the Kazakh border, traveling through Mongolia. So
Wow.
For me, it was exciting to come back now as a government official and have a different hat on, but also see how some things have changed over the last decade.
How big was your group that time when you were traveling to the border?
It was a small group. There was 3 or 4 of us who traveled around and visited interesting parts of the world, and so this was somewhere where we wanted to just come and see.
So you are almost after 13 years back to this country.
13 years later, and I've just been here for a very short period of time just now, but just the period of time of landing at the airport, driving from the airport to Ulaanbaatar to our hotel, you can see just the tremendous amount of growth, of change, of development that's occurred in a relatively short period of time. So I think a lot has obviously been happening here over the last decade or so. A lot of growth, a lot of development, and probably a lot of opportunities here in
Yeah,
Mongolia.
but it is. You have been at that time working where? What was your professional career at that time?
Yeah, so I've been in government in the United States for just over 4 years. I joined the Obama administration as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Oil and Natural Gas back in 2009. Prior to that, I was working in oil and gas companies. So I was actually in Latin America working for Chevron at the time when I came here to Mongolia on vacation.
You have done West Poinт Military School, and you have done your MBA at Cambridge, Cambridge in Massachusetts, or
In England.
In England,
Yeah,
Cambridge in England,
right.
Almost like President Clinton.
A little different. Yeah, he was Oxford.
Did he? Yeah, he had a special scholarship, I understand.
Yeah, he was a Rhodes Scholar.
You got also a scholarship?
No, I was not a Rhodes Scholar,
Okay.
which means I had to pay my own way.
Oh, okay. So, just I'm curious. You have been a successful businessman. You have been working for J.P. Morgan, investment banking, then Chevron.
Right.
And why you have switched to government work?
Well, I spent a short period of time as an Army officer. And for me, it was a privilege to be able to serve my country. So to come back to the government at a time of tremendous change, tremendous opportunity, tremendous timing in terms of developing technology that the United States is going to need in order to compete in the clean energy economy of the future. But also for me, very importantly, an opportunity to travel around the world and help build the relationship between the United States and other important partner countries around the world, which is, back to your original question, one of the things that really brought me back here to Mongolia.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the relationship with Mongolia. What's your take about the current situation in this country in terms of energy sufficiency, the way we supply energy, or to be exact, not with a great deficit? How do you find the situation in the country?
Interestingly, a lot of the challenges here are very analogous to the challenges that we're facing in the United States. How do you ensure that you're building energy security? How do you make sure you're building new options for consumers and businesses within the country? And how do you make sure you're doing it in a way that's respectful for environmental sustainability, for safety, for maintaining our core values in terms of protecting the environment? So those are the challenges here in Mongolia. It's the same challenges that we're facing in the United States. I'll mention a couple of, I think, advances that we've been able to make, which I think will be relevant to some of the challenges here. Over the course of the past 10 years or so, the United States has gone from essentially providing almost none of its natural gas from unconventional sources like coal bed methane and shale gas to today's point in which we're producing about a third of the natural gas that the United States consumers use comes from unconventional sources like shale gas and coal bed methane. That's had a lot of benefits, and one of the important benefits there is that not only has it increased energy diversity and energy security and lowered the prices that consumers pay, but it's also led to a decrease in greenhouse gas emissions. Instead of having to rely as heavily on burning coal, now we've got options of using natural gas as well in greater quantities at lower prices.
Do you think it's a natural shift to come from coal to natural gas, a country sooner or later to come to this point? In terms of Mongolia, how do you find it? Because we 100% coal today.
Yeah. Well, we have a strategy that we call all of the above, and our president has pushed forward that strategy that says, we care about renewables like wind and solar. We also care about new technologies like enhanced geothermal that might bring additional sources of energy, nuclear power. But importantly, there's a large portion of our energy that comes from fossil fuels, and we have to ensure that we make those safe, that we make them reliable, and we're also developing the technologies that reduce the carbon impact of using fossil fuels. So we think that they're all important.
So the speed of technology you are developing and introducing, certainly, as Schumpeter said once, right, you are creating this destructive, how you call it? Disruptive right, creation.
Right.
And recently that's what happened in the U.S., where you have started to have much more shale oil yes, produced.
Yes.
As a result, you have increased also your coal carbon emission requirement higher, right, and the rest now many companies are already exporting coal to China.
Right.
I mean, is it the tendency in all developed countries, or it's only in the U.S.? What do you think in terms of coal and coal as a source of energy?
Well, I think it's hard to tell. One thing that we certainly do believe is that when it comes to coal, we think that first of all, if you care about greenhouse gas emissions, and if you care about climate change and all the things that we do care about, you have to be very active and aggressive at developing the technologies that help you take that coal utilization and reduce the environmental impact. Mm-hmm. So we are busy developing those technologies in the United States, and you have to do it in a way that allows it to be adopted not only in the United States but around the world, in China and in India. And so we believe that all different sources of energy are going to continue to be important. It's hard to look in your crystal ball and see what's going to be the technologies of tomorrow. Certainly a lot of industries have been surprised at the rate of development, and so
exactly that's what's happening here. We cannot see as a crystal ball.
Right.
As a result, we are depending on the way how China buys coal.
Right.
And now China have more and more new importers of coal, coking coal, competing with Mongolia. Right. And as we speak, the whole our export went down completely, right, twice, right, 3 times less. And in that circumstances, we want to sell coking coal to China, right, and yet we use the coal for, I think about all the 10%, 20% of coal we produce, we use for inside domestic consumption.
Right, right.
And now people talk about the future of coal in how much China will increase the import or decrease. How do you find that energy consumption of China?
Right. Well, every country is going to need diversity, and it's going to need options.
Diversity.
And I'm not the expert on export opportunities from Mongolia, but certainly the greater the diversity of export opportunities that you have, the more choices and the more options you're going to have in the future. Also, there's, as you're aware, that one of the difficulties here in Mongolia is in terms of mechanisms for actually transporting coal from Mongolia to China. Mm-hmm. Right now, my understanding is that most of that's moving via truck as opposed to via rail or some other mechanism. So that's a manpower-intensive and expensive way of moving large volumes of coal. Certainly,
it should be on rail.
Well, if I understand there's issues around rail of getting that line negotiated and figuring out what the technology standard is going to be in terms of how the line's is developed. But certainly, once that infrastructure is in place, it lowers some of those costs.
Where does your government, your department, in which field of coal, of fossil energy, you are responsible for the United States, you are working with Mongolia?
Right. So just let's talk very briefly about kind of the area that I oversee, and then perhaps some potential areas of collaboration. So my role is I'm the Assistant Secretary for Fossil Energy, so I handle all of the fossil energy technologies within the Department of Energy. So coal, natural gas, oil, and I'm also responsible for the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. One of the big challenges here, I think, is that there's as I mentioned before, some of the challenges here in Mongolia are very analogous to challenges that we've gone through very recently in the United States. In terms of putting forward a very transparent and open and understandable regulatory environment that attracts investments and attracts those investors. There are certainly a lot of American companies that are interested in bringing funds here to China and bringing to Mongolia and bringing technology here and investing here in Mongolia. So those are areas I think that we can have continued and increased collaboration. And we've worked very closely with our State Department in a lot of areas that looks at understanding best practices, kind of looking at case studies from the United States, things that have gone well, and some things that we've done that we think that other countries can learn from in terms of mistakes as well. So,
what is the key component, environment that we need to attract foreign direct investment, particularly American coal industry players, to come to Mongolia?
Well, one thing that I note is that the Mongolian government's signing of the transparency agreement here has been, I think, an important step forward. It helps ensure that there's a common frame of reference for how we look at contracts, how we look at contract stability, how we look at sanctity of contracts, how we look at openness and transparency of regulatory environment. At the end of the day, investors here in Mongolia or anywhere else in the world are looking for an environment in which they've got regulatory certainty. They understand the rules of the game, and they can look at some of the competitive advantages that exist here in Mongolia, and they're able to weight that against opportunities around the world, because all the world is chasing essentially the same pool of capital, and we think there are a lot of great investment opportunities here in Mongolia if the terms are clear and transparent.
You were talking about the Strategic Petroleum
Reserve.
Petroleum Reserve. And well, physically, I think it's somewhere in Texas, and you have what is that for? I mean, how big do you have it now?
So the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, it's as the name implies, it's a reserve of oil that's kept in the United States for energy security. We've got salt dome caverns in the Gulf of Mexico, in Louisiana and Texas, approximately 700 million barrels that's kept in place so that we've got some options if there's some major supply disruptions that impact the U.S. economy.
How long it will be enough to keep the U.S. economy moving? 2 months? A month?
Yeah, so there's a standard that's international standard that's 90 days of covering imports. And so that's the general standard that
every country usually have that sort of reserve for keeping up 90 days consumption of the country.
The countries that we collaborate with have that coverage. Yes.
How much do we have?
I wouldn't know. Okay.
All right. At a certain point when the petroleum price comes up and down, you sometimes use more. You bring out from the reserve so that you have a certain equilibrium in that price. How often do you do that, and when you do that?
Yeah, so in the past decade, the petroleum reserve's been used relatively infrequently. But the standard is that the reserve is something that would be employed in times of emergency, of shortage of supply that has a vital impact on the U.S. economy. So that's the standard that's used, and basically it's essentially an insurance policy that we have in place that helps maintain stability and security of supply.
See, we are fully fueled gasoline fuel dependent on Russia. And the Russians keep increasing or usually increasing export tax.
Right.
And we are always dealing with, always keep coming up oil price or food product price. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, obviously, Mongolia is a sovereign nation that has to manage its own energy security. But I'd say that, some of the challenges that you have here are not dissimilar to the challenges that we have in the United States or in other parts of the world. There's always an interest in maintaining energy security and doing so in a way that's consistent with building your economy and ensuring economic growth.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about the CTL, called to liquid.
Right.
And it's very fashionable now. I think we have at least a couple or 3 projects keep going on here. How much is it feasible in that terms? Do you use CTL?
Right. Well, CTL is a technology that's been around for a while. One of the challenges of CTL technologies is to deploy it in a way that manages the greenhouse gas emissions. So one of the projects that we work on, or one of the technologies that we're investing in heavily within the Department of Energy, is technologies to capture the CO2, the carbon that would come out of any process, be it CTL or coal-fired power plants or natural gas-fired power plants or industrial processes, capture that CO2 and store it in geologic storage in a process that we call CCS, or carbon capture and storage. So when you're looking at CTL or any other carbon-intensive process, we think that making sure that we're reducing the greenhouse gas impact, that we are capturing the carbon that's coming out of these processes.
How do we make sure now? There are 2 CTL based on both German technology. One is the Lurgi, the other is, I think, Thyssen, and they sus oil. That's what I know. And do they have the technology does this technology have the requirement of CCS?
Yeah. Well, the CCS is something that you're going to have to integrate into the project when you're actually applying, or when you're actually developing the CTL process. So it would be something that it's not inherent in the process. You would have to make the decision that
it's some sort of additional investment you need.
It would be additional investment, because you actually have to do something with the CO2. If you're in an area in which you could utilize the CO2 for something like enhanced oil recovery, then you could put the CO2 to beneficial use. Okay. In other cases, you might be able to use it for, we're doing research in how can use CO2 for enhanced produced water.
But it is a requirement in the U.S. If you use CTL, you also make sure that you have this CCS.
Yeah, well, it's not first of all, there's not a lot of CTL projects kind of moving forward in the U.S., and certainly the regulatory environment is, it's in constant flux.
Shale oil has some quite substantial structural changes in terms of what you use as energy. What happened there? Please tell us about this shale oil. What does it make in terms of your consumption structure? Well,
shale oil has actually been it's been a really exciting story.
New technology.
It's what's essential. The story of shale oil is that there were, starting in the 70s, there was a significant investment that was made by the Department of Energy in hydraulic fracturing technologies and in horizontal laterals. And the goal here was to unlock natural gas that was stored in shale formations. We've always understood the geology of shale gas. We've known where it is, but the technologies, when they were developed, it made it economic, and suddenly now we've got a very large percentage of our natural gas is coming from shale gas formations. A byproduct of that is, as you understand how to develop shale gas, those same technologies, horizontal fractures and fracturing and hydraulic fracturing and horizontal laterals, have been useful in unlocking oil reserves that come in very similar geologic formations. And so in North Dakota and in South Texas are the 2 areas where you're seeing a lot of shale oil production. North Dakota, which really was not a big contributor to oil production in the United States, is now the 2nd largest state in the United States in terms of oil production, just behind the state of Texas.
So those 2 together are half?
I'm not sure it's a half, but North Dakota is the 2nd largest state.
You see, I'm asking the question because nowadays this shale oil is becoming a very popular topic, more popular than CTL here. Some officials visited North Dakota, and that have been talking on a certain technology that they are using there. And nowadays the Mongolians are just in stuck. They are looking for new information. Is it good? How much this fracturing technology is good, etc. And if, according to their source, they say that we will have enough gasoline from that shale oil we have, not only for Mongolia, we will be even able to. We have to export those. I mean, is it possible?
Well, I mean, so back to an earlier question when I kind of mentioned it's hard to look in a crystal ball. You know, here's a personal experience from my standpoint. Before I came to the Department of Energy, I was working at Chevron, and in the 2000 to 2004 timeframe, I was working on a project to import LNG that would be produced in Angola or Australia. There were a terminal in the Gulf of Mexico, and the necessity for that terminal was that the amount of natural gas being produced in the United States was declining. Prices were very volatile and tended to be very high. And so at that point, industry was looking at spending billions of dollars to import natural gas to sell to American consumers. So fast forward a few years. So here we are in 2013, and now we're actually looking at the opportunity of exporting natural gas through the very same terminal that industry was building to import natural gas. And now this is gas that would be produced in the United States, exported through the same terminal. It used to be an import terminal that would go to markets overseas.
Wow.
So in the space of a few years, you know, without making any predictions about Mongolia, but in the space of a few years, you can see that even in the United States, you've seen a complete reversal in the direction of flows, and that comes from the development of technologies.
With the same infrastructure you have been using?
It's a similar infrastructure. It's the same footprint, same terminal, but you have to make an additional investment so you can actually compress the gas and export it instead of importing it.
Yep. Well, let's back to your school time. You have done military academy at West Point, and why you went there? Why you have decided to be there?
Well, it's a hard question. Why did you decide to do anything when you're 18, I suppose? But it's
you were playing basketball. Obviously, you're almost 2 meter.
No, actually, I was not a basketball player. I actually ran track.
Have not you been playing?
I play for fun. If I was any good, I'd be doing something.
Have you tried it with President Obama?
I have not been invited to play.
Right, okay.
But when I get that invitation, I'll certainly take him up on that. But at the time, you know, my planned future at that point was to be an Army officer, and I spent a few years as an Army officer. I learned a lot doing that.
And surprisingly, you have engineering degree there, management.
Right. That's what I
at the military academy, you have studied engineering.
Indeed. So the United States military at West Point initially was a university that was created solely for the purpose of creating engineers for the development of the American West and the United States. Over time, it evolved, and now you can major at anything there at the military academy. It's a 4-year accredited university. You can major in physics or philosophy or history or engineering. I happen to major in engineering.
But unlike many ordinary universities, at West Point you have to be also physically very much trained.
Indeed, there's a lot of aspects to it.
A lot of requirement, good particular culture of that physical development?
Well, the purpose of the military academy is to develop leaders for a lifetime of service to the nation. You're going to start out as an Army officer, and the goal is to train leaders of character to serve our armed forces. And so there's lots of components to that. There's leadership, there's the academic background, and a lot of the characteristics that the academy tries to instill in its cadets and its students comes through its athletics program. So
indeed, leadership. Yeah. And you are the good example of that leadership. You have been trained, and now you're such a young man in charge of fossil energy department of such a big country like the United States. What is the most important thing you think in leadership, would you share to the young students in this country?
Yeah, well, that's a hard question right there. I'll say that I was very fortunate to have had my formative years at the United States Military Academy and subsequently as an Army officer. And you know, the one thing I say to folks as they go into their first leadership opportunities is you know, my experience as a brand new second lieutenant coming out of West Point.
Second lieutenant.
Second lieutenant. So that's how you start. And I was a platoon leader, actually stationed in the Republic of South Korea near the DMZ with the 2nd Infantry Division.
Close to North Korean border.
Close to North Korean border. And you show up straight out of school and you think you're a pretty smart guy with your West Point degree and you know a little bit about engineering equations. And you're in charge of a platoon and you've got 4 squads and a platoon sergeant. And the people who you lead know a lot more about what it takes to run that unit than you know when you show up. And having that humility to learn from the people that you lead, to lead but to also serve the people that you lead, I think has been a lesson that's served me very well. So whatever job I go into, I always have lots to learn. I think if you lead with a sense of humility, it helps you create an environment in which the people that you lead, that follow you, are, first of all, they're willing and enthusiastic about following you, and you're creating a framework for them to excel and for them to create value, and that's the best thing I can do to create value.
Wow. What was the very hard for you make decisions in your life, very controversial decisions in your life, otherwise you would not do, but you have to. Have you been in that circumstance, whether in the military or now in a big high-ranking public service?
Yeah, well, certainly, you know, one of the, I guess the fundamental challenges of public service is if you're moving forward, if you're doing hard things, you're often in positions where, you know, you might not know exactly what to do. You're breaking new ground. You're thinking about things for the first time. One of the challenges, leadership challenges that I had was a couple of years ago, I was appointed as the federal official for the Deepwater Horizon Commission that the president created after the BP spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Unprecedented disaster, and we had the challenge of trying to figure out what went wrong while the spill was still going on. Things were still going wrong.
Quite for some time, yes.
Yeah. So that certainly was a difficult leadership challenge in terms of managing that commission, of helping deliver good recommendations to the president and to the country. And then in my job, helping to follow up with the research and development to help ensure that you never have an event like that in the future.
How many people do they work under you all around the country total?
Yeah, within the entire Office of Fossil Energy, we've got about 1,000 employees, including we've got a government-owned, government-operated laboratory. It's based in Pittsburgh, called the National Energy Technology Laboratory. So we've got a really talented workforce that's doing great work across the United States in our laboratories and in our headquarters in Washington, D.C.
In terms of your work, you said e-government, right?
Sorry?
E-government. E-government, electronic government. No?
Okay.
That component of modern telecommunication, internet, all this software, all this together, does it, I mean, in many countries, big staff work, not that much productive, effective, all this government office. How do you find your office in that sense compared with the military division you have been working?
Well, I'm based in Washington, D.C. We've got our laboratory, which is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we've got another lab in Morgantown, West Virginia. We've got a satellite office down in Houston, Texas. We've got another component of our lab, which is in Albany, Oregon, in the West Coast. And all of these locations have to work together seamlessly. In fact, we work together on different projects, even though we're not geographically in the same location.
Every morning you see them, all of them on the screen or something. What kind of connection is there?
Well, very regularly. I mean, we've got a weekly teleconference where we have all the leaders tapped in. So it ensures that wherever you are in the world, or in the United States or wherever, that you have access to people you need to talk to and that you're able to collaborate real time. And that gives you the flexibility to, in some cases, spend less time in airports and airplanes and more time actually doing your work. So it's something I try to utilize. But there's nothing that substitutes for actually going and getting this face-to-face interaction, which is why I still spend quite a bit of time in airports and traveling the world.
Your department and the whole industry, how much state is producing, how much private sector is producing the energy in your country?
So that's actually a really good question. So in the United States, the energy is produced essentially by the private sector. So let's focus for a moment on natural gas. So you have natural gas that's produced on public lands, and you have natural gas that's produced on private lands.
So difference is land.
Yeah.
whether the land belongs to private sector or private person or public.
Right. So you've got public ownership of
Yes.
resource in the United States, and even on public lands, where the lands are managed by the Department of the Interior, and the resource base is owned by the Department of the Interior, and royalties are paid. Those resources are still produced
by private companies.
Private companies.
So basically, all energy in terms of production is produced by private sector.
Yes.
Do you regulate energy price?
We do not regulate energy prices.
It's a market.
Yeah, the market manages energy prices. Our primary role, looking at kind of who does what within the executive branch in the United States, the Department of Energy manages technology development. So we work with national laboratories and with, in some cases, private sector companies to develop new technologies that we believe are going to be in the public interest. And we look to make investments in areas in which we don't think private companies will. So you
more invest into R&D if you in this business part of it.
Exactly. The lion's share of our activities have to deal with research and development for new energy technologies.
Do you have energy regulatory committee?
So we do the R&D. The Department of the Interior is the entity that regulates energy production on public lands. And on private lands, energy production is primarily regulated by the states. So we've got 50 states in the United States. There's about 32 different states that have oil and gas production.
How many network do you have? All interconnected, or you have 5 separate, like Federal Bank has 5 separate federal banks?
Networks as in terms of pipelines and connections. So there's a very robust set of interstate pipelines that's regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the FERC. And then you've got local distribution centers, local distribution networks that then take natural gas into
in
local
terms
areas.
of electric energy, electric power, you have a united one system?
Well, we've got lots of systems that interconnect. So
if one is shut down, the other can completely replace?
Well, that's actually a good and complicated question. As the grid grows and it becomes more complex, and it also becomes threatened by issues like we've had a big storm last year that had a big impact on availability of electricity and of gasoline and diesel. So as the system becomes more complicated, as it becomes bigger, we have to be smarter in terms of how we manage this grid, because you have to identify areas of vulnerability, and there are some areas of vulnerability, but you have to identify those, make sure that you're doing the right type of research so you can understand the vulnerabilities, you can make the right type of investments to mitigate those.
Okay, Mr. Smith, my last question would be on how do you see the future focus of relationship between two countries in terms of energy sector development?
So I certainly see lots of areas in which the United States and Mongolia can work together. Again, I'd certainly laud the signing of this recent transparency agreement, which helps the United States and Mongolia have a single set of standards for transparency and for regulatory clarity. I think we can continue to work together in those areas, and we look for opportunities to find ways in which Mongolian companies and American companies, Mongolian government and the United States government can work together on a wide variety of issues that are in mutual interest of our two countries. And so
that's, I think, pretty much in the interest of Mongolian private sector, in the energy sector in particular, though it is too much regulated and the state puts on price, and it's many entities that work inefficiently. But I think certainly will be not the case after maybe another 13 years of visit.
Well, hopefully it won't be another 13 years
That's
before
what I hope
I come
too.
back. That's my goal.
Thank you very much.
All right, well,
and your visit to this country will help certainly a lot our professionals to think, and young people to think about their future profession, to be probably not only military, but good engineer, good professional, and good minister.
All right. Well, certainly the engineers and the scientists of the future are the ones who are going to be helping to build this country and build the world, indeed, find new solutions. So we think that's tremendously important.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank.
Good luck.
All right.
Thank you.